Yeah. Well, we'll see if it works, but very good. Rania is there, and we will manage to pull over. We hope. But I think Christian looked very forward to give a presentation, so hopefully he succeeds. And,
yes, we had a very good email exchange, and it was very interesting. Also, his abstract.
Yeah. So I will give my speech in English then. Well, I could have been giving it in French, since the spiral dramaturgy topic has been published in French. But I think it's better that I do it in English. So, and how is Vienna at the moment? Is it with regard to the COVID situation? Is it all precautions taken away now, or are you still under a regime?
They took it away at the beginning of March, and then came the catastrophe. It's clear that it will come. And yesterday they said once more the masks. And I don't look at these things anymore. I just have my mask. And I did the things, or I do the things which are necessary.
Yeah. And you have all the vaccinations?
Yes, I have 3. Since 15th October, I have 3.
Very good, yeah.
Yes, but I have about 100 different vaccinations because I was in 120 countries.
Yeah.
And when you go to Cameroon, for example, you have to have one against yellow fever. And in other parts of the world, you have against cholera and all these things. Just normal.
Yes. So now it's 12 o'clock, and I don't see. Can we wait a couple of minutes to see if Christian connects from Yaoundé?
Martin, wie ist das? Läuft die Dokumentation?
Ich habe eine neue Dokumentation gestartet.
Okay.
Die muss jetzt nur noch auf die Homepage, also da war jetzt die Zeit ein bisschen kurz.
Ja, Martin, wirst du jetzt die Streaming anfangen für diese Sektion, oder warten wir noch 2 Minuten? Also ich sehe, da ist Christian. Hello, Christian.
Sobald du mir sagst, es ist okay, kann ich das Streaming beginnen.
Ja, jetzt ist Christian da. Christian, est-ce que tu peux m'écouter? Tu es là? Est-ce que tu peux...
Nein, es startet noch die Verbindung zum Audiosignal. Solange hört er nichts.
Ja. Le signal audio, est-ce que tu peux le mettre, Christian?
Christian ist nicht mehr da.
Doch, da ist ja. Technospark ist das.
Ja. Christian,
le microphone. Le microphone. Vous avez activé le microphone.
Est-ce que c'est bon?
Très bon.
Okay.
Très bien.
Ouais.
On est là tout le monde. Et c'est comme tu veux, tu peux faire ton présentation en français si tu veux. Moi, je peux le faire en anglais et Rania aussi, mais c'était à toi si tu veux le faire en français ou en...
Oui, je vais le faire en français.
C'est bien, très bien, très bien,
Euh,
bien. Martin, jetzt glaube ich, dass wir alle dabei sind und du kannst den Streaming anfangen.
Okay.
Martin, le modérateur, il va commencer le streaming, donc on attend le signal.
oui.
Ja, c'est ça, et c'est ça. Bien, good. So we have this section on the ritual and the dimension and the performance, the ritual and performance and colonization with different aspects that we are going to cover up. We have a program of 3 speeches. First, my speech, which is on the ritual, the popular and political dimension, touching upon nomadism and viral dramaturgy. So, are you there, Rania? Yeah, Rania, you are there?
Yes.
That's very good. I cannot see you. Maybe I see you. No, yeah, no, I can see you. Yeah, so you heard my presentation. I could say something more. Rania is a freelance critic and directing. She has a background in theater studies and media studies at the University of Bergen, Norway. And Christian Tongo is based in Yaoundé as a performance artist. He's running a festival every year or every second year, representing a very dynamic milieu of performance art in Cameroon, and also a great traveler of the world. And he has been in Norway in a festival some couple of years ago. Well, I am glad we can combine this South-North axis, which I appreciate myself very much. The South-North axis is very interesting. I wrote an article on nomadism, which was immediately taken from some artists in Africa, and the illustrations were from the savannah instead of from the Arctic, which was a very nice gesture, which made me sure that these perspectives are very relevant. For this speech, I want to start a little bit theoretically, speaking about the question of dialogic spaces, from art as ritual to art as dialogue. And I can start mentioning that there was a Soviet-Lithuanian philosopher, Grigory Pomerantz is his name, who was a specialist in Dostoevsky and the polyphonic aspects of the Russian writer Dostoevsky. And he used his work on Dostoevsky to develop a theory on the arts and the relationship between art and the shamanistic and the ritual and the polyphonic, which is very highly relevant. He lived in the he died somewhere a few years ago. He was in the 1950s librarian of the secret library of Stalin in Moscow. But his origin was from Lithuania. He was a Jewish Lithuanian philosopher. This way of philosophizing on space and dialogue is, in my mind, very relevant to understand the situation today, the situation in visual arts, where the concepts of visual arts and performance, of course, and theater where the concepts of landscapes and spaces reflects the individual gaze and standpoint. Such spaces and interiors, like interior, the inside of the experience or the outside, can be metaphorically expressed and transferred into abstract and figurative images. One can speak about a metaphorical gaze that can be used in art and science as a means to apprehend both cultural and personal identities and memories in social and political sense. The theatrical gaze is a gaze from the outside, which looks and conceptualizes from a personal point what is going on in in this process of transference of images and metaphors. The normative construction of meaning, as we know from classical drama, has in a way proved insufficient for comprehension in both artistic and scientific senses. So we more and more work on the implementing contextual factors that influence the development of art and theater in a way that transforms the marginalized into an expression of a decentralized and nomadic comprehension. A decentralized and nomadic comprehension. So visual art and performance is a matter of various personal approaches, creating a break with what we could call mainstream or mainstream thought or the mainstream orientation. And this kind of break, which is very relevant to what used to be spoken about as the marginal, which now more and more the marginal is getting more and more in the center, from margins to the center, as a scientific book was called. I used to speak about an artistic post-mainstream, which I have defined in some articles, also published on the INST website, a periodical Trans, which you can find on the net. This post-mainstream is an expression of liberation from centralized thinking and meaning construction capable of accommodating marginality. The dissolution of centralized thinking is thereby an outcome that allows gaze to wander freely, nomadically, in the sense of landscape, like the term nomadic used in a metaphoric way, but which can be also applied very concretely, like the artist who is nomadic, working nomadic in different countries, at the same time as we have a concrete nomadism with people living in nomadic lifestyles, following their livestock, their animals, and herding them, which is the traditional or classical definition of nomadic. When we reflect on this nomadic situation, we can also touch upon the question of legends, folk tales, and performative expressions that are related to rituals, in the sense of ritual of a religious kind, as well as rituals of a social kind, which is a kind of broad backdrop also for African art. So hybrid expressions merge various artistic genres or various historically distinct artistic periods and contribute to an experience of art that is more open than we could hitherto have imagined. Landscapes and interiors become meaningful as loci or places of exposed materiality, in the sense of the material you make performance from. And there are, of course, some historical roots of this, which can be found in the Polish theater artist Jerzy Grotowski, who claimed that theater should be poor. It should renounce on outward technical effects. Antonin Artaud, the French visionary of theater, sought to place theater's visual and oral means of expression on an equal footing, leaving the dramatic text away. And Grotowski, on his side, claimed a 0-point position by emphasizing the poverty of theater, which was a kind of movement also expanding into visual art, arte povera, as they spoke about it in Italy. The poor theater, the poor art, which is not poor in the sense of not having means. Well, maybe can be discussed in what sense we can perceive of the poor, but it has to do with 0 points and the doing with the more simpler means of that can be used to create art. That art does not need all this technology, which was to Jerzy Grotowski the rich theater, which he in a way blamed for taking away the intention of the audience, like the consuming culture. So this idea of the poor was in opposition to consuming culture, and the great show, as also Guy Debord, the French situationist thinker, spoke about as the spectacle, the theater of the spectacle, which is also very interesting. But anyhow, Artaud asked for a theater less based in language or speech, but more in physical expression and situation. And this situationist thing is also very, very relevant today. That's as an offspring for working on new forms of theater, which should do without necessary need the technology. Let me advance to the question of the cultural clashes towards decolonization. We can take the Arctic drama, the Arctic theater, an example for approaches into performativity, which connects to the nomadic situation, the Arctic desert as a site for non-orientable expressions, in the sense of you have to find your own traces in the landscape and your own expressions in the landscapes. So there is a connection there in my mind between the far north and the south. And this came to an expression in the concept of spiral dramaturgy, which was developed by the Danish Greenlandic philosopher Ulla Rium, who spoke about the circular or spiral of a nomadic storytelling kind. Which would break away from the classical European dramaturgy based in the Aristotelian thinking, and one can find many examples of this spiral storytelling in performative works, in the traditions or the new, more recent ways of making theater productions in this style. That we can find in different Sami companies and also in Greenlandic theater. So, and the topics that would be dealt with in this spiral and nomadic tradition would be topics like nomadism versus industrialization and urbanization, and the conflicts it would create. There were storytelling festivals organized, like the Ridu Ridu festival in Troms in northern Norway, or workshops organized by Scandinavian nomadic-oriented artists and thinkers in performance work. And I think it's interesting to also to mention that our friend here, Christian, once gave a workshop with Greenlandic actors in Copenhagen. So, this is the South-North interaction, which is connecting the Arctic and the south of the savanna in Western Africa, if one may say so. And this is, in a way, the backdrop for me wanting to invite to this section both Rania Brod and Christiane Tango. So I want us to proceed to first Rania Brod giving your presentation, The Mother of the Theater, and which is related to Morocco or the Maghreb city.
Yes, that's correct. Connected to Morocco, yes.
Yes, so please, you have your 20 minutes. And
Thank you, Knut Ove. My name is Rania Brod. I am born and raised in Norway by origin from Morocco. So I will just jump right into it. Between 4,000 and 2,000 years before the Common Era, nomadic Amazighian people were the first to settle in Morocco. Oral and performative traditions can be dated back to the beginning of the Arab conquest. But oral traditions were long before that a part of the indigenous culture. Halqa was performed in open spaces, the market, or in private homes. My presentation, Halqa, the mother of the theater, emphasizes on the bearer of the stories and fairy tales, whose audiences gather around in a circle, but also that Halqa might be one of the oldest forms of theater in Morocco. Storytelling theater has been a well-established tradition with the Hlaqi. A Hlaqi could also act as a messenger and pass on news from neighboring towns or villages. Essentially, a Hlaqi was considered an entertainer. The entertainment could also be with instruments, singing, and dancing. In some cases, the Hlaqi were part of a troupe, which together conveyed fairy tales and fables, or stories rooted in real history. Regardless of whether the Hlaqi performed alone or with others, he or she had an artistic and personal style. My reflections I will share with you come from different Moroccan actors and directors I've spoken with and interviewed, a couple articles I have written, as well as information I have gathered from different books and different documentaries. My focus will also be on Marrakesh, where my research first began in 2018. One thing my research has taught me, we need to speak to the elders who still remember a past before it's too late. And Morocco's oldest form of theater, as I see it, is on the path of extinction. Of course, the short time given me, we will only be scraping the very tip of the iceberg for examples and explanations of Moroccan theater. My focus will be on Halqa and on the theater play Sharjah Humman, which I saw in Marrakesh in 2018 as two examples of Moroccan theater. To understand why modern Moroccan theater at first glance can be viewed as old-fashioned or different, we need the past to understand the present. So let's go back in time to the year 1062. Marrakesh is founded by Yusuf ibn Tashfin, leader of the Moroccan Almoravid Empire. The local storyteller, Hlaqi, arrives at the square market, Jemal Fna. People flock around him in a circle. They get a story, maybe the sequel from last week or yesterday's, continuation of an episodic series, a continuation that can and cannot end. Halqa can be storytelling, monologue, acrobatics, magic, fortune-telling. Halqa can contain poetry, philosophy, lessons and knowledge of anything. halqa can contain a tragedy or comedy. A halqa can provide answers to a riddle or be told as a riddle. It is told with or without props and costumes. It is told alone or with one or more others. Halqa is theater. The one performing it, the male حليقي or female حليقية, lives on donations given to them by their audience. It is therefore a profession one is called to do. The حليقي lives for its artistry. It can be passed down from one parent to their child. Now, this brings me to Morocco being a diversified country. Many different countries are represented in Morocco if we trace back different groups of people's roots. Migration, conquest from different times, trading with Europeans and Asians and other Africans, and of course, the slave trade which passed through Morocco. It is very poorly documented. What we know is that during the 15th and 16th centuries, the Portuguese were running a slave trade between sub-Saharan Africa and the Moroccan port cities. During this time, it is generally acknowledged that the largest migration came during the reign of the Saadiyiins, the first Arab Sharifian dynasty to rule Morocco. And skipping a lot of history, the point is this. Depending on different ethnic groups and regions in Morocco, a rich culture has always taken place. An example of the diversity of what a halqa can be is the non-verbal way of performing a halqa. Now, if you don't have drums or instruments, or are skilled in stamping with your feet, in what is called the clap or the beat of Marrakesh, daqqa marrakshiyya, you simply use your hands as an instrument to clap and join in on a performance. Now, I am really skipping a lot more examples. I have hours of footage that shows and really speaks volumes on its own in showing the diversity and richness of Moroccan dance, music, and of course, halqa. And also in different contexts, but I have to skip it all to talk now about the play Sharjan Humman that I saw in Marrakesh at the Royal Theatre by the group Firqat Nujum El Wafa, led by the actor Haj Ahmed Shihima. The play is written by the playwright Abd al-Rahim al-Khardali. In my reading of the play, I see that it is very loosely based on Ludwig Holberg's Jeppe on the Hill. Several Moroccan plays intertwine the dramaturgical plot of European classical pieces with something recognizable to Moroccans. At first glance, Sharjan Humman seemed simple, but behind the comedic facade and the simple form of the performance, it turns out that the performance had a multifaceted depth. Traditional forms that primarily come from folk rituals, shikhat, were incorporated into the play. Many of the theater groups in Morocco tour the country with performances based on a theme. The purpose is to gain awareness to an issue or spread enlightenment and refer to conflicts and solutions that give these performances an educational function we know from European theater in the 18th century. Sharjan Humman, a comedy about the retired veteran Humman who served during the First Indochina War. Since the end of the war, he has been unemployed and broke. He lives in a riad owned by the Frenchman, Monsieur Jacques, with his wife, Rakia, and her sister, Amel. The sister-in-law, Amel, earns her living as Sheikha, a Moroccan traditional singer and dancer who entertains at parties and weddings with her folklore troupe, Shikhat. The troupe in the play consists of 3 women and an overly feminine man in the play story. Those who played the Shikhat troupe were in fact a real folklore troupe that performed on stage. In the play, the folklore troupe not only stayed there to entertain the characters in the play, but stepped out of their role and went on to entertain the audience who now engaged in a call and response. The incorporation of this troupe into Sharjan Humman led to a social happening. The songs and shouts were extended as the audience continued to sing the song they knew well, something that the Shikha troupe accepted, so did the actors. The folklore group performed as Shikhed, continuing the song and performing another. And this went on for a while. The play paused before they went ahead with the play's story as written by the playwright. Humman served in the First Indochina War with his brother. The brother escaped from the war. To give his brother a cover story, Humman reported him killed in the battlefield. In reality, the brother stayed in Asia, most likely Vietnam, started a family, and died of old age. A secret Humman has kept from his family until one day he receives a letter. Now being illiterate, he is dependent on someone to read and tell him what the letter says. He gets help from his sister-in-law, Amel, who in turn tells the secret to the other characters. The secret is that Humman's nephew in Asia will come to Morocco with $5 billion for investments in the country. This means that both Humman and the others see their opportunities to earn a fortune. He becomes like Jeppe, the transformed peasant. Humman's greed and assumption of getting rich means that he expresses his independence towards Monsieur Jacques and takes a settlement he otherwise would never have taken. Monsieur Jacques ends up throwing out Humman, and the rich nephew, who was to be Humman's rescue, announces his resignation at the very last minute. Humman, like Jeppe, wakes up from his dream. Now, Moroccans were, against their will, recruited by the French army to both the First and Second World Wars. During World War II, Moroccans were nicknamed Death Eaters by the Germans due to their sensational strength on the battlefield. From 1946 to 1954, the First Indochina War was fought between the Vietnamese resistance movement, Viet Minh, and France. More than 300,000 Moroccans fought under French rule. It is in this war that the men in the play are said to have served in. That the veterans in Morocco are poor as Humman in the play is a well-known fact. During the reign of Morocco's late King Hassan II, a pension agreement was negotiated for Moroccan veterans. The catch was that they had to live and stay in France. Then there were those who were missing in action or faked their own death for a new life in an Asian country, just like Humman's brother in the play. With the pension agreement with France and the assurance of no retroactive punishment for deserting the French military, many descendants of Moroccan veterans in Asia were in fact reunited with their families. Humman's wife Ruqiyya wears the pants in the relationship and demands that Humman finds a way to make a living. The couple's dynamics were similar to Mother Åsa and Jeppe, where Humman is also terrified of his wife and her hard blows. Humman is possibly also an alcoholic like Jeppe, without this being said explicitly. Due to alcohol taboo in the country, and especially in the conservative Marrakesh, and the fact that the play was a family show, it is rather Humman's smoking and laziness that Ruqiyya is most annoyed by. From a Moroccan perspective, the adult audience will read between the lines and understand that what the dialogues are really about. It is also a way of saying something by meaning something else, like an allegory, without breaking the boundaries of freedom of expression and at the same time keeping the performance family friendly. What in Moroccan Arabic, darija, is called ma'ani, something citizens of Marrakesh are very famous to be experts on. When it comes to theater of resistance, when ritual practices met with European theater influence, it was with a form of protest. The hybrid form of contemporary theater in Morocco is the result of precisely a resistant movement against the French and Europeans. The Moroccans have taken on something in the center. It is not the history of the Europeans, it is the Moroccan. Allegories of the European classic, be it Holberg, Molière, or Ibsen, the European theater transformed into Moroccan theater deals with Moroccan suffering the European has inflicted on them throughout history. packed with historical layers and symbolic layers. You have to know your Moroccan history. You have to understand Mani, the Moroccan and very complex subtext in the language. I think you can go out with a number of riddles, Manis, in your lap after a performance. The key to understand a play lies in solving these puzzles. As I said in the beginning, a halqa can be performed as a riddle. To put it in perspective, it took me some months to discover all of these layers of explanations about the play Sharjah Human was packed with. How we know theater from a European perspective is a new phenomenon that gained a foothold in Morocco and among Moroccans as late as the 1960s, after the country's independence in 1956. Haj Ahmed Shiba told me, an actor and elder who has grown up in tandem with the rise of the modern Moroccan theater. Among the oldest theater troupes, they are seen preserving the folklore tradition by implementing them in their play. The pieces are loosely based on European classical pieces, told from a Moroccan perspective about the social problems that date back to colonial times. And as I see it, Moroccan theater is consistent of cultural preservation for performative traditional expressions, Enlightenment theater, and finally as an art form. Morocco's history is marked by invasions and colonization from the last part of the Stone Age, Neolithic period, to its independence from France in 1956. The performative traditions have always been a way for the local Moroccans to cultivate their identity. The foreigners did not regard Moroccan rituals and storytelling traditions as theater. It's thanks to performance study that the ritual traditions were considered somewhat performative. Now, when it comes to political figure, there are also examples of the Hlayqi in Halqa being considered a threat to the Romans during the Roman Empire, or the Arabs, or the French imperialists. During each invasion, the Hlayqi was stopped as satire and proclamatory speeches at the expense of local rulers gave them greater popularity among the locals. The Hlayqi had an entertaining as well as a political role that speaks and narrates. The phenomena Ma'ani arose in everyday speech to partly entertain and at the same time confuse the listener. A linguistic shield disguised as a weapon. The phenomena is linguistically complicated and distinctive of Darija. The complexity of the language, together with the rhetorical ability to the Hlayqi, made him at times an almost political speaker. In the linguistic exchange of codes, a collective unity also arose, and us against them. Hlayqi became the whom the people went to hear comforting stories about the protagonist who overcomes adversity. In some cases, the stories were deliberately constructed with encouragement to the population about what they should do during the resistant movements, yes, in plural. Codes and messages would also be passed from, for example, Shi'at songs, much like the songs during the slavery in the US. Moroccan theater is both compromising and resisting at the same time. The more I studied the Halqa, the more it reminded me of the Polish director and actor Jerzy Grotowski's Poor Theater. Grotowski coined the term poor theater, defining a performance style that rid itself of the excesses of theater, such as lavish costumes and detailed sets, hence being called poor. But if I tweak Grotowski's pieces and say, Halqa, pieces center on the skill of the Hlayqi and are often performed with only a handful of props. As a halqa, the Hlayqi performed works in spaces such as in the open space market, buildings, and rooms. Typically, the audience was placed on many sides of the action, creating a circle, or in and amongst the action itself. Storytelling in the style of halqa places emphasis on the physical skill of the performer and uses props for transformation into other objects, sometimes of great significance. Today, the halaqi is recognized as one of the great starting points of Moroccan theater and significant entrance of the experimental theater movement. Halqa can be performed in any bare space, so performers with few resources often find this style of theater attractive. Halqa is the origin of what Grotowski called the poor theater. He also described it to be a pure theater. The very essence of Grotowski's description of the poor theater I read as Moroccan or African. Halqa is not characteristic to only Morocco. I am only focusing on a Moroccan perspective. It is another African ancient tradition a European has coined and claimed to be revolutionary or innovative after it was ridiculed and viewed as the exact opposite by the Europeans on African lands. Now, I often read that theater did not exist in Morocco prior to colonization. Now, I need everyone to really understand this in order to decolonize the view a lot of theater scholars have, including Moroccans, that there was no theater tradition in Morocco prior to the colonization of Morocco and the rest of the African continent. It has also been a personal process of mine to kind of coin back Grotowski's poor theater and say, halqa, the mother of the theater, the purest form of theater, is the oldest form of theater in Morocco. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Rania. Very interesting, also connected to what I said about Grotowski. That's very good. So it fits in. Eh bien, on va passer le mot à Christian et Tango. Donc, j'ai déjà présenté vraiment à l'introduction. Christian, est-ce que tu es prêt à donner ton discours maintenant? Ici, oui, je te invite à commencer. Est-ce que tu peux m'entendre?
Oh, ok, c'est bon.
Oui, c'est bon. Et tu as entendu que je disais, je t'ai invité à donner ta présentation.
J'ai entendu. Bien, je m'appelle Christian Etongo. Je suis artiste du Cameroun. Je fais des performances depuis 1997. Je travaille sur le rituel de purification. La base de mon travail, c'est des rituels africains, des rituels du Cameroun. Et je travaille spécialement sur un rituel qui est un rituel de purification au Cameroun qu'on appelle le tso, qui est un rituel qu'on pratique quand il y a eu un crime, quand il y a eu l'inceste, quand il y a eu un accident, une noyade. Donc, c'est un crime, c'est un rituel pour purifier la communauté. C'est un rituel de pardon. C'est un rituel de réconciliation. Donc, j'utilise ce rituel pour travailler parce que je pense que les humains dans le monde entier devraient se comprendre, c'est-à-dire parler d'une même langue, parler d'un même langage, éviter les guerres comme en ce moment. Voilà. Et puis, le fait que je travaille sur la colonisation a fait que j'ai transposé ces rituels de purification sur la colonisation. Parce que pour moi, pour partir de la colonisation, pour partir pour décoloniser les mentalités, décoloniser nos pays, il faut absolument qu'il y ait ce rituel. Et ce rituel, comment est-ce qu'on le pratique? Le bourreau demande pardon et la victime a l'obligation de pardonner. C'est ça le principe du rituel So. Donc, on doit redéfinir les relations entre l'Occident et l'Afrique. Donc pour moi, le tout n'est pas de demander qu'on fasse la réconciliation, le tout n'est pas de demander qu'il y ait cette purification, mais il faut déjà accepter, parce qu'il y a un déni. Il y a certains pays occidentaux encore qui refusent, qui n'acceptent pas que la colonisation était une très mauvaise chose pour les Africains. Il y a un problème comme le problème de l'esclavage. Quand j'étais jeune artiste, on nous a dit que ce n'était pas bien de travailler sur l'esclavage parce que c'était quelque chose qui est passé et il ne faut pas penser à ça. Il faut avancer, il faut chercher l'avenir, il faut travailler sur de nouvelles choses. Et quand moi, en tant qu'artiste qui a de l'expérience, je constate que la plupart des peuples parlent de leur passé sans avoir honte, sans être gênés, sans être embarrassé. Donc tout le monde devrait parler de son passé. Et parlant de notre passé, nous devons parler de ce passé pour redéfinir le présent, pour redéfinir le futur, pour que nos enfants sachent ce qui s'est passé, pour que nos enfants sachent comment se comporter, que ce ne soit pas une surprise. Donc pour moi, j'ai donc fait une performance que j'appelle After Tears, qui est une performance où je dis après la guerre, après la haine, après les pleurs, qu'est-ce qu'il faut? Cette performance a été créée à Berlin pour les 130 ans de la commémoration de la conférence de Berlin. Donc, il y a eu beaucoup de manifestations, beaucoup d'événements à Berlin en 2015. J'ai donc fait partie des artistes qu'on a invités pour faire des performances dans cet événement. J'ai été invité par la Volksbühne, qui est l'un des plus vieux théâtres en Allemagne. Et j'ai donc créé cette performance que j'appelle After Tears. Et cette performance a été jouée ailleurs, en Allemagne, en Afrique du Sud, au Cameroun, au Bénin. Et cette performance, c'est une performance que je montre le rituel, c'est-à-dire c'est un rituel. Il faut dire que le rituel Tso est un rituel qui ne se montre pas en public. Mais moi, j'ai pris la responsabilité de prendre des éléments dans ce rituel pour montrer au public ce qu'on doit faire pour se réconcilier et pour qu'il y ait pour que le sang soit lavé. Parce que pour moi, il faut d'abord laver le sang, il faut d'abord laver le péché, il faut d'abord laver les fautes, il faut laver la haine, il faut laver la colère, il faut laver les rancunes, les rancœurs, pour qu'on avance. Sinon, il y aura toujours une relation de suspicion entre l'Occident et l'Afrique. Donc, j'utilise donc ce rituel parce que je pense que... Et aussi, j'utilise ce rituel parce que c'est un rituel qui a été interdit par l'Église catholique. Le rituel Tso a été interdit parce qu'il est considéré comme de la sorcellerie, il est considéré comme un rituel maléfique. Alors, comment vous ne pouvez pas expliquer qu'un rituel qu'on pratique pour faire de la réconciliation, pour établir l'amour, la confiance, et qu'on vous dise que ce rituel est un mauvais rituel parce que c'est un rituel de sorcellerie. Donc moi, je réhabilite ce rituel et il faut que je dise que ce rituel, quand je le fais, il n'est pas bien vu par la communauté africaine, il n'est pas bien vu par les Camerounais parce que ils sont ancrés dans la religion et pour eux, c'est mauvais de faire ce rituel. Alors, c'est paradoxal parce que quand j'exerce le rituel Tso, les Africains, les Camerounais me disent « Oh, ben, c'est pas bien parce que l'Église interdit ça, mais peut-être que ça va intéresser les Européens. » Et quand je fais ce rituel en Europe, les Européens pensent que c'est quelque chose que je fais, c'est africain, c'est normal que je le fasse et que c'est bien vu chez moi. Donc, moi, ce que j'essaye de faire, c'est de montrer qu'avec les rituels qui ont été interdits ou qui sont morts, nous pouvons réveiller la paix, la réconciliation, nous pouvons recommencer de nouvelles bases et avoir un nouveau deal. Parce que pour moi, l'Afrique est le nouveau projet. L'Afrique est le nouvel endroit où les autres devraient venir s'inspirer de la spiritualité, de l'économie, de la politique. Donc, il est normal que les artistes africains, les intellectuels africains recommencent, réhabilitent tous ces rituels qui ont été perdus. Voilà, nous revenons un peu sur, en parlant de rituels, en parlant de religion et de spiritualité, nous revenons sur un phénomène qui se passe aujourd'hui qu'on appelle la restitution des objets, des artefacts. Voilà quelque chose pour moi aussi, qui est comme une distraction parce qu'il y a beaucoup de choses à réhabiliter d'abord en Afrique. Il y a beaucoup de choses à réconcilier entre les Africains parce que à cause de la colonisation, nous avons des frontières, nous n'avons pas une monnaie unique, c'est-à-dire la monnaie que j'utilise en tant que francophone au Cameroun, ce n'est pas la même monnaie qu'on utilise au Sénégal. Mais toutes les deux monnaies sont le franc CFA. Mais ce n'est pas la même monnaie. Donc, je ne peux pas utiliser mon billet à Dakar, et à Dakar, il ne peut pas utiliser son billet à Brazzaville. Donc, voilà quelque chose qui est ridicule. Je pense que nous devons revenir sur tous ces points, les frontières. En Europe, nous avons vu avec l'Union européenne, les frontières ont été levées. Il n'y a plus de frontières. Mais en Afrique, nous avons des frontières. Et ces frontières sont des frontières coloniales. Le Gabon, le Cameroun, la Guinée équatoriale, nous parlons la même langue, le fan, mais nous avons des frontières où il faut avoir un visa pour se rendre dans l'autre pays. Donc, je pense que tout ça devrait nous interpeller, nous les Africains, ça devrait nous interpeller pour que nous nous unissons, pour que nous soyons là-dessus, pour décoloniser d'abord nos mentalités, décoloniser notre façon de voir les choses, notre façon de faire les choses, et relaver pour redéfinir nos relations avec les autres. Accepter, il faut déjà que les autres acceptent qu'il y a eu quelque chose. Par exemple, nous avons un souci au Cameroun, un pays comme la France nie la guerre des années 70 au Cameroun qui a coûté la vie à 700 000 Camerounais. Et nous avons par exemple cette guerre qui n'est pas reconnue par la France, cette guerre qui est considérée comme oubliée. Donc, voilà des choses que ces rituels, le rituel dont je parle, devraient réhabiliter. Ces rituels devraient reparler des guerres oubliées, des hommes qui ont été assassinés pour la liberté, des personnes qui ont été tuées parce qu'ils ont voulu remettre à l'Afrique sa dignité. Donc voilà mon intervention à peu près sur le rituel et la performance. Je pense qu'en tant qu'artiste, la spiritualité dans le rituel que je pratique est en train, pour moi, est la source d'inspiration principale pour pouvoir parler des maux de ce monde, pour pouvoir parler de ce qui se passe, pour pouvoir voir les choses autrement, pas comme un citoyen ordinaire, mais comme un artiste qui a un regard profond, un regard mystique, un regard spirituel sur la marche du monde. Donc voilà, pour moi, c'est l'intervention que j'avais à dire aujourd'hui. Et pour finir, d'abord, je suis content de participer à cette rencontre. Et aussi de partager avec Rania cette expérience parce que il est important que les artistes disent ce qu'ils ont à dire. Il est important que, au-delà de ce que nous montrons aux gens comme création, il faut que nous parlons aussi aux gens pour leur dire ce que nous avons à l'intérieur de nous. Et c'est comme ça que nous allons éveiller tout ce qui nous regarde ou tout ce qui nous écoute. Merci.
Oui, merci, Christian. C'est très intéressant de t'écouter. Et on va ouvrir peut-être pour les questions ou des commentaires ailleurs. Moi, j'ai une question, mais je vais laisser le mot, par exemple, à d'autres, Rania ou Herbert. Est-ce que vous avez quelque chose à dire à la fin? On a 7 minutes de faire.
I do have a comment on Christian's speech when it comes to les rituels interdits. When it comes to ritual, I mentioned that there were the slave trades that passed through Morocco. What happened was also that Africans were enslaved, and some groups were also then held captives in the different palaces of different sultans, which also meant that a artistic and ritual practice, which today is called Gnawa, which also has this spiritual practice. And the same thing, it also became viewed as interdit because it also, the spiritualism would also then invite what is in Moroccan called mlouks also, which means spirits or ghosts. But what Morocco has done to kind of mainstream Gnawa and preserve this cultural practice, they have done a very active history or cultural memory preservation, and in trying to kind of translate and explain to the Moroccans the richness of this practice. And today it's kind of very much mainstream. And now it's you have a lot of Gnawa festivals in Morocco, and it's also gone very mainstream in the fact it's gone internationally as well. But what we know when it comes to the Gnawa tradition is that it did in fact come from the other African countries. And because they then now were against their will settled in Morocco, the different African groups who participated in Gnawa, it was very much reserved. So it was only within the family. For an outsider to be invited in, you really had to gain the understanding of this ritual. But what is nice now is that you can say that even it was a rituel interdit, now it is not. Now this understanding, but of course one needs resources and a lot of explanation to then understand the values of these ancient traditions, which I am very much also trying to kind of explain further when it comes to the ancient theater performances that you have in Africa from way back. Thank you.
Well, interesting. Thank you, Rania, for a nice comment. Est-ce que tu veux faire un commentaire à ce que Rania a dit, Christian?
Oui, je pense que nous avons pratiquement la même histoire, c'est-à-dire une histoire similaire, j'allais dire, pas la même histoire. Nous avons des histoires similaires en ce qui concerne nos coutumes. Parce que je pense que la force d'un peuple, c'est sa langue, la force d'un peuple, c'est sa culture, la force d'un peuple, c'est sa spiritualité. Donc, si on interdit, si on refuse à un peuple de parler sa langue, à un peuple de faire sa culture ou de pratiquer sa spiritualité, ça veut dire qu'on veut tuer ce peuple. Donc, pour moi, je pense qu'il est très important. Par exemple, le rituel dont parle le Rania, l'Inawa, je connais ces rituels au Maroc, c'est un rituel qui est mal vu. Même, je pense, à l'extérieur, quand on nous parle de ce rituel, on parle d'un rituel satanique, maléfique, un rituel de transe, où on tape de tambour et les gens entrent en transe. Donc, c'est pas bien vu. Je pense que c'est une histoire qui est créée pour pouvoir faire peur aux gens eux-mêmes. Donc, il est important aujourd'hui de le savoir. Il est important aujourd'hui de revenir en arrière sur ce que nous avons à faire pour avancer. Donc, je suis d'accord avec Rania. Voilà.
Oui, merci, très intéressant. Ma question, ça, ça peut se connecter à ça que tu as dit maintenant, Rania Asti a dit, les rituels qui sont dits de faire peur. Mais si on dirige le regard vers Groenland, il y a la danse de masque qui était créée pour faire peur aux enfants, qu'ils pouvaient survivre dans l'Arctique. Donc, c'est une espèce de pédagogie. Mais ça, c'est une ressemblance qui n'est pas nécessairement très relevante ici, mais ça me mène à ça que je voulais te dire au début, tes expériences avec les secteurs de Groenland, quand tu étais à Copenhague avec cette workshop organisée par Henrik Westergaard Pedersen. Est-ce que tu peux dire quelque chose, seulement très brièvement, au-dessus de ces expériences avec le secteur de Groenland pour que nous fassions cette connexion nord-sud?
Oui, j'ai travaillé avec Jesse Kliman. Jesse Kliman qui est du Groenland et qui est très, très, très vraiment concentré dans sa culture et dans sa spiritualité. Donc, nous avons, malheureusement, nous n'avons pas pu avoir le financement pour travailler entre l'Afrique et le Groenland, mais nous avons pu réaliser à Copenhague une performance sur les musiques mystiques, les musiques mystiques inuites, du peuple inuit, qui ressemblent à des musiques de la forêt au Cameroun.
Donc, oui, très intéressant. Très intéressant.
Des musiques similaires, des chants mystiques des Hollande qui ressemblaient à des chants mystiques de la forêt au Cameroun. Donc, nous avons développé une performance qui parlait justement de la réhabilitation de nos rituels, de notre spiritualité. Et c'était une performance collective où nous n'avions pas besoin d'expliquer ce que nous faisions parce que nous avions la même histoire. Dans l'histoire de la colonisation du Groenland par le Danemark et par l'histoire de la colonisation de la France par le Cameroun. Donc, nous avons même souffrance. Nous avons, elle a apporté des masques et moi, j'ai apporté des objets d'Afrique. Nous avons travaillé ensemble d'une manière naturelle. C'est-à-dire, nous n'avons pas fait quelque chose, nous avons travaillé d'une manière naturelle. Et pour moi, c'était une très belle expérience de travailler avec Jesse Kliman qui vient du Groenland. Donc, nous pensons que ce genre de projets doivent se répéter pour qu'il y ait une connexion nord-sud. Voilà.
Très bien. Merci, Christian. C'était très, très intéressant. Et Herbert, si tu veux faire quelques commentaires conclusifs, je pense que ça que Christian a dit maintenant réunit un peu le discours qu'on a voulu faire dans cette section. Mais si tu as quelques mots pour conclure avec, par le part de Jura Soyfer Gesellschaft, tu es bien invité. On a trespassé le temps, mais si tu veux faire une minute de commentaire, Herbert. Mais on ne t'entend pas, wir können dich nicht hören. Du musst das Lied einschalten. Also,
thank you very much for this important contribution. We will have another section this afternoon at 2 o'clock Viennese time, and it will be about the history of Africa. But normally when you talk about history, you talk about the wars and the tribes, something like that. But most important is to understand the art of Africa. And we will have a contribution by Isaac. He will speak about the Tassili Mountains. And this is the very old history. Normally, they said in Europe, the nation is as important as its history. And they go back 1,000 years, 2,000 years. But when you go back to African history, this is 3.2 million years. And this is a big difference. And I think in Europe, it will be important within the next years to understand what your contributions mean to Europe. That is very important that in Europe will be understood what Christian, what Janea said about the history of the art and the importance of the art in Africa. Because to see it in this way, with the colonialism came the culture. This is such for people who don't understand anything. They don't know anything. And just to tell a little anecdote, I made in 2003 an expedition on Kilimanjaro. It was not important to climb up. We climbed up, but most important was to understand the culture there. And it was in the area of Kilimanjaro that there are the foundings of the first human beings. And Kilimanjaro is only 500,000 years old. So you see, first were the human beings, then was Kilimanjaro. And about the name of Kilimanjaro, the Europeans came and asked, which is the name of this mountain? And they said, Kilimanjaro. And when you translate it, it means this is the little place by Sharo. This was not about the mountain. This was a misunderstanding. And so a lot of things European did with names and other things. It's just non-knowledge. So thank you very much for this important contribution to this polylogue. I highlight them very much. Thank you.
Oui, thank you. Merci beaucoup à tout le monde d'écouter ça. Et Martin, on est terminé maintenant. Si tu peux nous